Tendinopathy is not really an inflammatory condition. It is called tendinitis in the past. Tendinopathy is not really an inflammatory condition. It is called tendinitis in the past. Yeah, so ice and NSAIDs don't help because it's non-inflammatory, 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 non-inflammatory.
How are you gonna overcoming gravity?
What's up, guys? Welcome to the new Music is Conditioning episode 4. On this episode, we'll be featuring the one and only Stephen Lowe. Now, if you don't know who Stephen Lowe is the author of Overcoming Gravity as well as the author of Overcoming Poor Posture. Now, beyond guiding you through how to progress into these advanced calisthenic moves, Stephen also places an emphasis with regards to injury prevention and also speaks about muscle imbalances in his book. If you're new to fitness or just new to working out in general, I think this is a pretty great book with regards to just showing you all of the basic terminology that you need and giving you a sense of programming. I definitely think a lot of what you find in the book, you can definitely incorporate and add into different modalities of training. Now, beyond being an author, Stephen is also a former gymnast, a coach. He has a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, as well as a doctorate in physical therapy. He has also performed with Gymkana, a gymnastics exhibitional troupe. If you don't know who they are, well, check them out. Yeah, it's some pretty crazy and awesome stuff. Now, with regards to Steve's own personal training, he primarily focuses on gymnastics, parkour, rock climbing, and sprinting. So just a little bit of a side note, it was a little bit difficult to kind of get the intro of this edit down, so we're just gonna dive directly into the interview. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoy. You know, if anything, let's start with, I think, something that most people, I guess, are gonna wanna get into. Let's talk about tendinopathy. What are your experiences with tendinopathy from an athletic perspective, from a physiotherapist perspective?
Obviously, a lot of people get it, athletes and musicians alike. Currently writing a book on that now, actually. And in most cases, like the vast majority of cases, it's almost always overuse injury. So usually people are doing too much too soon in terms of volume, like starting with too many exercises or maybe practicing too much. But there are also other considerations such as like poor technique can potentially exacerbate the potential for tendinopathy. Even some medications can do that as well. And then even like some genetic considerations like how your shoulder acromion is structured that I guess you can kind of try to work around if your parents gave you some bad shoulders.
Can you maybe lay out some of the misconceptions that people might have with this?
Yeah, so there's actually a bunch of them. One of the biggest ones is that like ice and NSAID drugs like ibuprofen don't really help. And that's because tendinopathy is not really an inflammatory condition. That is called tendinitis in the past, with the itis suffix being that inflammatory, but most of the medical community has moved towards tendinopathy because that describes like the nature of the pathology of the tendon. So so ice and NSAIDs don't help because it's non-inflammatory. And then a second one is that rest usually only helps when the tendinopathy is more acute in nature. So there's various stages of tendinopathy, such as reactive stage, more of a disrepair stage as a second stage, and then degenerative. Only in the like really reactive stage, where it's in the first few weeks does rest like significantly help the process. And then once you get into those latter stages, you usually need some type of rehabilitation along with maybe lowering the type of exercise so you don't aggravate it. And then another misconception is that pain is not necessarily associated with injury. Generally speaking, when you get into the more chronic cases where you've had the injury for about more than 3 months, sometimes the injury has actually healed, or at least for the most part normalized in function, but maybe the pain pathways have been a bit sensitized. So movements that would not normally cause pain in healthy persons maybe become dysfunctional and cause pain.
Do you still recommend exercise when people have tendinopathy?
Yeah, so that's kind of a complex question. Generally, I do recommend someone like working with in concert with a medical professional, ideally, that they lower the exercise level to some level that it doesn't aggravate the injury or make it like worse in function and in pain possibly, and then do rehab on the side. However, some people have that kind of like go-getter personality or like type A where they once they start practicing or doing their sport, they can't turn it off. Like instead of doing like only a couple exercises, or maybe like in the case of something like basketball, like that light day pickup game kind of turns into like a very intense 2-hour like all-out competition type of practice. So like if somebody can't hold themselves back or has a very poor time holding themselves back, then generally full rest and rehab in those cases can be a better option.
Things that I think you touched on that were kind of interesting is the idea of form in terms of preventing injury.
Yeah. So that's actually one of the first things I look at when people are coming to me, at least in terms of injuries. You want to look at what they're doing to see if that is contributing toward their like tendinopathy or their particular injury. And then also you want to see their quality of movement in the exercises you're either prescribing them or giving them to ensure that they're not only that they're doing them like right, but that they're being able to progress in quality of movement. Because especially when you're dealing with injuries, pain is kind of an inhibition effect on the quality of movement. Like it kind of down regulates the ability of your muscles to output force. So when that happens, usually your movements can tend to become shaky, or you may have some compensation patterns where you're, like instead of lifting your arm up with your shoulder down, you're kind of shrugging up to get the shoulder up when it's painful. So you got to look out for those compensations, and then also just the quality of movement, getting them back to being able to control without shaking or vibrating back and forth.
Yeah.
Get the point.
Yeah. What is it called? I know something that we maybe talked about last time was the idea of, because we're talking about rehab, but also the fact that sometimes in rehab it's also a mental game with regards to people believing that, okay, I've been injured, I guess my career is over. But I know that in other sports, injury is common. People come back, people recover, people keep moving forward. Do you think it's definitely important for people to make sure that they recognize when they have an injury, like tendinopathy, and also when they might have some mental setbacks with regards to their ability to be able to come back?
Yeah, that is important. And I would, if you're having those negative thoughts, it's definitely a good idea to talk with like your physical therapist or your doctor, or even like a sports psychologist, since those are becoming more common for athletic teams and probably even music as well. That is important because usually when your psychology goes down, it makes it much more difficult to get into the correct rehab mindset where you're very disciplined in doing it to get back to your sport, or it can just negatively affect you in your not just the rehab, but the continuing to practice aspect. Mm-hmm. So that may kind of go to the wayside, and your skills may start to crank a little bit as well.
You say the word pain a lot, and I was wondering, could you maybe tell me the difference between aggravation versus pain?
Yeah, so aggravation, I generally like that word better than pain because most people, when they're concerned with injury, are like, okay, this is painful. Like, how do I make it so it's not painful? And that can generally work for acute injuries where, pain and the injury are very tied together in most cases. But as you get along to that, 2-3 month mark where the injury might have healed already and the pain is still there, that's when you kind of get into those chronic pain issues. So I tend to like to use the word aggravation, and what I mean by that is where a particular exercise in practice or a rehab exercise is at a level where it's not making your function worse. So like your quality of movement, you're not like losing strength or endurance, and you're improving on those metrics, getting back to your sport or improving in rehab, and the quality of movement is improving as well, versus pain, because pain can be present during rehab in some specific cases, like in a lot of the Achilles and patellar tendinopathy studies, they have the patients actually work through some level of pain, maybe like 1 to 2 to 3-ish out of 10. But as long as it doesn't get worse and doesn't get worse over a long period of time, usually as the function improves, the pain will also improve as well.
Wow. You mentioned the word endurance. So I kind of wanted to ask you about the importance of muscular endurance, especially with regards to posture.
Definitely very important. I think I like to think of things in very like task-specific contexts. So, if you're like a marathon runner, you need to have a lot more endurance than if you were doing like a 5K or 10K. So, when you're a musician, if you're playing like multiple hours versus, a recital that may only be an hour long or something like that. So, the endurance level definitely should vary based on the specific competition or like task that you're doing, and you don't necessarily need more than that, although it can help sometimes. But yeah, very task specific in terms of what you want to do.
I know something we talked a little bit about last time was the training capacity, like how long it takes to actually develop the capacity to maybe be able to say, okay, I'm going to, have a recital and it's an hour long, but let's say, as an example, I only practice 15 minutes a day. Like, how long, realistically, have you seen athletes take to be able to really build up that endurance?
It depends. So, like, a lot of the very intense, so at the end of endurance races, for example, you need to be able to sprint to the end if you're with that, lead pack of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. In general, the finishing endurance, so like the ability to sprint at the end of a long race, that takes about 6 to 8-ish weeks to build up. So that's not necessarily like super relatable to being able to go from like 15 minutes to 60 minutes. So, but it does take some time to build up that specific endurance. So you need to be working on it, over at least a month out to be able to build that. So you can't just jump from like 15 minutes and then jump straight to 60 minutes without negative effects usually happening. And there's some work on that in terms of stuff on work capacity. So they've done some studies on work ratios where you have a specific one workout that you're doing, and then you compare it to the previous 3 weeks of volume. And what they're finding is like if the volume is increasing more than about at a 1.2 to 1.3 ratio, you're going to have a greater potential for injuries because you're doing a little bit too much too fast.
So there's definitely like fine tuning with regards to not only planning how far ahead you need to be ready for that capacity, but also even before that, how you're building up into that. It's not just something, it's not a switch, it's definitely a progression.
Exactly.
Damn.
Not too fast, but not too slow either.
Yeah. If anything, you know what, that kind of leads me off into, I guess, this idea of plateaus and overtraining versus undertraining. Let's say somebody has an exercise routine and they keep doing the same routine, but they don't realize that adaptations have already occurred and that that same routine is now actually easier. So they're actually running into this idea of undertraining. So maybe if you could explain a little bit of that.
That kind of ties into the SAID principle a bit, the specific adaptation to imposed demand. So when you're doing the same routine over and over again, your body is already used to that level of stress, so it won't adapt as much based on what you're doing as if you had, added an extra repetition or an extra set into your workout routine. So in general, I'm a pretty big fan of figuring out what works for you. So, if you're in exercise, if you're not progressing well, or you can't, go up that extra rep or that extra set, then, you can kind of change it up. If you're not having success going up that extra rep, maybe add in that extra set, or maybe add in, like pause reps where you finish your set and then you rest 5-10 seconds, do another rep or two. And those can help you to break the plateaus. And then there's also the context of undertraining. And generally, that's where I like to start most people. In general, it's very easy to overdo things, especially in exercise. And I'm sure in music as well, especially if you're, high on learning all these new pieces.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if you're starting with way too much, it's hard to find out where your problem is if you plateau, because if you're doing too much, okay, maybe you're overworking your body, and then you don't know if you don't know if you need to add volume or take some away. Usually I'm a big fan of starting with too little, and then, okay, you're not improving much, okay, let's add a little bit and see if that brings you into the adaptation range. Plus, it's safer because it helps you to stave off overuse injuries.